Today we'll be taking a second look at the newest Stompy Walker in the Space Marine arsenal. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy and tactics focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the table. In today's video we'll be taking a look at the Invictor tactical Warsuit. It was one of the very first videos I did for this channel, but times have come on a lot since then. We've had several new supplement books and Psychic Awakening books released, and I've had a decent amount of experience playing both with and against these things. So in this video we'll take a look at its datasheet, any obvious rules, buffs and combos that we can put together with it, and how I would run them myself on the tabletop. In the background, the Invictor tactical Warsuit is mounted on a stripped back Redemptor Dreadnought frame, obviously piloted by a living Space Marine rather than an ancient crippled veteran of the chapter. It's typically deployed in the support of Vanguard Space Marine elements, scouting ahead of the main force and providing rapid, brutal firepower and close combat support in all manner of battlefield scenarios. Its signature weapons are the twin Iron Hail Autocannon, which can rapidly engage and destroy enemy light vehicles, and the incredible power of the Incendium Cannon, its enormous heavy flamer variant. All very nice, so let's see how it performs on the table. So the Invictor is an elite choice for Codex Space Marines. When armed with the Incendium Cannon, it'll cost you 131 points, and if you upgrade to the Iron Hail Autocannon, then it'll cost you 136. For that investment, you get a Redemptor Dreadnought chassis that's a little bit faster and a little bit less well armoured. It has a movement of 10, weapon skill and ballistic skill of 3+ that degrade in the normal way, strength of 7 that will be upgraded to 14 with its fist, a toughness of 6, making it a little bit more fragile than your standard battle tank, a mighty 13 wounds, 4 attacks, leadership 8 and a 3-up save. Each Invictor is armed with a Fragstorm grenade launcher, a heavy bolter, and 2 Iron Hail heavy stubbers in addition to its main armament and its Invictor fist. So it's packing quite a lot of anti-infantry firepower no matter what variant you put on it. In particular, I've found that heavy bolter and 2 Iron Hail heavy stubbers, having strength 4 or 5 and an AP -1 or 2 in Devastator Doctrine, is really useful against a whole variety of targets. The Incendium Cannon is essentially a 12-inch range, heavy 2d6, auto-hitting heavy flamer, with strength 5, AP -1, and damage of 1. It synergizes quite well with the Invictor wanting to move a lot, due to auto-hitting, and is really the weapon of choice for clearing out large amounts of light infantry at close range. The twin Iron Hail Autocannon is heavy 6, strength 7, AP -1, and a flat 2 damage. So this one will naturally do a lot better against heavy infantry and light vehicles, and having that extra 48-inch range means that it can really be flexible, whether you deploy it back with your main army, or whether you're running it up close to use its close combat capabilities as well. After having some experience playing with and against these, I generally prefer the autocannon to that Incendium Cannon. The reason being that when I've played against models that have the Incendium Cannon, it's really easy to outrange them even with that 10-inch movement, or even if they aren't outranged, they typically don't have a very good choice of what they want to attack. Even if the Invictor moves, provided it's on its top profile, it'll still be hitting on a 4+ with that autocannon, so should still have 3 strength 7 AP -1 damage 2 hits, which will often be more valuable than the 7 strength 5 AP -1 hits that the heavy flamer will get anyway, particularly against light vehicle targets. Interestingly enough, that autocannon has the same expected average damage output against multi-wound targets as a Predator autocannon, so it really has quite a decent damage output. The reason I like it best though is that it actually allows your Invictor tactical Warsuit to be very flexible. Basically, if you're against an opponent that's likely to be charging his units towards you, you can deploy your Invictors back with your firebase, have them plug away at the enemy with autocannons and heavy stubbers and heavy bolters for a turn or two, and then still go forward and countercharge. If you're playing them with heavy flamers, you just really don't have that option. They need to start at least fairly far up the board to have any hope of getting in range, and particularly if you go second, it means that you really run the risk of your Invictors either being destroyed outright, or maybe being made redundant due to positioning. If you go first with Flamer Invictors, then they are certainly pretty devastating, but that certainly won't be in every game. I'd also let the decision of which chapter that you're playing also play into these. In particular, things like Salamanders will naturally love flamer weapons, and Blood Angels quite like close support sort of weapons, as they're very likely to be wanting to charge in. On the other hand, armies like Iron Hands and Ultramarines that don't suffer the penalty to moving and shooting with their heavy weapons when they're in the right doctrine, certainly might tip you in favour of the autocannon a little more. In my opinion, they're both good, but the autocannon wins out for me. Looking at the melee profile, that Invictor fist has a strength ×2, so strength 14, AP -3, and a flat damage of 3, meaning it's a little bit weaker than the Redemptor against big multi-wound targets, but will more reliably kill multi-wound infantry such as Primaris Intercessors or Aggressors, compared with the Redemptor Dreadnought due to its fist being damage D6. It'll typically have 5 attacks with Shock Assault, so on average has an output of 7 wounds against a toughness 7 vehicle with no invul save. That's a very scary punch indeed, considering that you can be easily getting first turn charges with this thing. Talking of the special rules it has Angels of Death, giving it Shock Assault for those 5 attacks on the first round of combat, Combat Doctrines for extra AP to most of its weapons in Devastator Doctrine. It can explode on the roll of a 6, and it is a big explosion if it goes, causing all units within 6 inches to suffer a massive D6 mortal wounds. If it is right in the heart of an enemy formation, it could even be worth a command reroll to try and make it explode, if you do have the small chance of doling out something like 6d6 mortal wounds, which could win you the game then and there if opportunity strikes. The Heavy Bolter has a heavy sidearm special rule, meaning that you can fire it as a pistol in close combat, which means if your opponent hasn't fallen back from the Invictor and it hasn't killed the target, it gets to blaze away with its pistol-style Heavy Bolter in the shooting phase. Though personally I've found this a fairly rare occurrence, due to it either killing its target, your opponent falling back, or your opponent having killed it himself. Finally, we come to Conceal Positions, the most scary and unique special rule of the Invictor, meaning that it has Scout Deployment, meaning that when you deploy this model, you can set it up anywhere that's 9 inches from both enemy models and the enemy deployment zone. Having 1 to 3 of these, being able to move 10 inches, blaze away with a whole bunch of heavy weapons, and quite easily likely make a first turn charge against your opponent, it's just ridiculously disruptive to your opponent's battle plan, and a few of these can really cause a headache. Being able to get this much firepower and might up the board, turn 1 is incredibly powerful. It can mean that you might be able to shoot things that are out of line of sight of your backfield units, score objectives turn 1 with some degree of reliability, and potentially charge and tie up enemy heavy hitters to prevent them moving or shooting quite as freely on the opponent's turn 1. This really is the rule that makes the Invictor as powerful as it is. There are very few things in the game that can deploy the might of a Dreadnought right into your opponent's face straight from turn 1, and with that 10-inch movement, guarantee that it will even be within your opponent's deployment zone. Pretty much no questions asked. So overall, the Invictor is a solid, well-rounded unit with good movement, good firepower, good close combat, reasonable durability for the cost, and of course its very scary forward deployment option. It all adds up to it being a great battle line unit, however you choose to use it, but let's take a look at some ways that we can get a little bit more out of it on the table. Firstly, chapter choice can really impact how you want to use an Invictor, and pretty much every chapter can get something decent out of it. Ultramarines in Tactical Doctrine can move and shoot with no penalty to heavy weapons, which is great for an Invictor who wants to be on the move, though it is a little bit problematic for first turn. Also, being able to fall back and shoot can be valuable, as there's certainly some scenarios where you'll be wanting to gain access to all of its guns, as opposed to fighting close combat such as against a horde. White Scars could have an enormous threat range turn 1 with advancing and charging, but of course this would preclude from shooting, which isn't ideal. Iron Hands are one of the strongest chapters to use any vehicle with, and the Invictor is no exception. It basically uses every single buff they give: slower degrading, 6 up feel no pain, better overwatch, moving and shooting for no penalty, and rerolling 1s to hit. The rerolling 1s is particularly nice, as you'll be typically wanting to use your Invictors as independent units, operating free of characters. They also have a number of other great synergies with vehicles as well, such as Psychic Powers, Warlord traits and the Ironstone, but I think at this point we already know that vehicles are great for Iron Hands. Raven Guard or the Stealthy trait can give you a 2-up save for counting as being in cover when you're outside 12 inches, not a bad durability boost at all, and this guy synergizes quite well with their forward deploying in your face playstyle. Salamanders or the Master Artisans trait are great for rerolls in close combat, and their rerolls also really help out the autocannon. Of course, if you're going pure salamanders, then the incendium cannon does become a more valuable option, as having a +1 to wound permanently on it will certainly increase its damage output. Imperial Fists are another great choice. This thing packs a lot of heavy weapons that are mid-strength and fairly low damage, so having ignores cover and +1 damage against vehicles certainly doesn't go amiss at all. These guys also generally want to hang out in Devastator Doctrine as well, which is only a good thing for the Invictor. Blood Angels, as I mentioned before, have quite good synergy with the Flamer Invictor, as in general you're just going to be wanting to throw them right up in the front of the enemy to act as a bit of a distraction, and also potentially take out some heavy hitters with +1 to wound on the charge. Dark Angels actually synergize fairly well with the Flamer as well, due to their boosted Devastator Doctrine, giving them a +6 inches to heavy weapons, meaning that Flamer's actually 18-inch range for them, which certainly helps to counter their main weakness. Finally, Space Wolves and Black Templars can also give some melee buffs to Invictors, but like White Scars don't have quite as much innate synergy. We mentioned character support briefly before, and Victors can use it if it benefits them, but I think that they're often going to be wanting to operate independently off on their own, making use of that great Conceal Positions rule. I'd just remember that if the actual game dictated it, you can start them back with your gun line, take advantage of any Captain or Lieutenant buffs for extra damage around, or maybe things like Tech Marines for repairs. Certainly if you can organise any of those buffs to help them out, then it's a good thing, but if it limits you from using that very powerful forward deployment, then it could potentially be doing more harm than good. In terms of stratagems, Armour of Contempt can always be used to shrug off a bunch of mortal wounds, which the Invictor might well be exposed to right at the forefront of the army, though you would have to be taking a lot to really justify the CP investment. Big Guns Never Tire can allow you to move and shoot without penalty if you don't already have a source of that. Honour the Chapter could allow you to fight again, and with a big fighty dreadnought-like construction, this could give you the option to overturn an enemy tank or a heavy hitter that you just didn't quite manage to kill in the ensuing fight phase. Finally, we already mentioned command rerolls. You could use them to reroll charges, or maybe reroll the explosions result if it's either going to detonate all over your army, or if it's disappointingly not going to blow up all over your opponents. So how would I actually go about running them on the field of battle? The general wisdom would be to run multiple Invictors if you're running any, as your opponent might well be able to deal with one of them, but not necessarily with 3, or even if they are able to kill 3 Invictors in a single turn. This might leave the entire rest of your army completely unscathed to go about all of its plans in your turn 1. I have been having some success myself running one Invictor recently. Sure, it does almost always die if you go second and your opponent dedicates firepower towards it, but that is generally acting as a distraction from my other very dangerous shooter units on the battle line, and it doesn't mean it's usually a bad thing. And if I do go first, then just having the one Invictor to tie up, hassle, and shoot down enemy units that are out of line of sight has proved incredibly handy in a whole bunch of games. So personally, I'm fairly happy to take anywhere between 1 and 3. They can still certainly be effective. If you know you're going first, it's probably worth positioning them in as threatening a way as they can possibly be. Particularly if your opponent has objectives in their deployment zone, it could be worth positioning one Invictor next to each objective, as you can pretty much expect your opponent will deploy troops or other units quite near those. Otherwise, you could potentially put them on midfield objectives and maybe zone out other enemy infiltrators such as scouts or rival Invictors from deploying on those same ones. There really are quite a lot of options. If you're going second, it might well be worth being a little bit more conservative. It might be better to make use of line of sight blocking terrain or any cover saves you can acquire, while putting them in a place that they can still be a nasty threat. Otherwise, it's certainly reasonable to deploy them with your main fire base if you have autocannons, have a few turns blazing away, and then hopefully make close combat a little later in the game. You can also tailor them to what your opponent's army is likely to be doing. If they're a gun line and don't want to be in close combat, deploy them right up close up front. If they're a melee army that's going to be coming to you, deploy them back. Let them wade through a few turns firepower before countercharging yourself. If you're going second, it's certainly worth considering prepared positions if you have left them exposed or haven't been able to get a cover save, as that'll help them at least soak up a little bit more enemy firepower before they go down. When the game's actually begun, you want to be trying to make use of both their shooting and their melee capacity if possible. I wouldn't usually expect wonders from their shooting, but they should be able to clear around a squad of light infantry per turn, which can be very helpful when dealing with troops scoring important objectives in the early game. I'd most certainly make use of any paths that you can to lock up enemy heavy hitters, like any tanks that have been unwittingly exposed turn 1, as a surprise long charge from an Invictor could really put a dent in your opponent's battle line, or just stop some units from shooting in the first place. Overall, I really like the Invictor Warsuit. It's a very competitive Space Marine model at the moment, and there's very little that's quite like it in the entire game. I think there's a reason that for the most part, anything with these pre-game deployment options tends to be at least reasonably lightly armoured and not particularly amazing in close combat, where this Invictor just completely defies the trend. I'm not sure if we'll see him addressed in the upcoming spring balance update. I guess we'll have to wait and see. I personally don't feel like it's the Invictor of all things that are making Space Marines so dominant in the meta at the moment, but there's no denying that they are a very strong unit and certainly outcompete many other units both from melee and shooting point of view, with their additional movement and deployment options only being icing on the cake. Let me know any of your thoughts and experiences with the Invictor Warsuit. It'd be good to hear how they're performing for you on the tabletop. I've certainly been having decent success with mine. It's a really fun model to use, and generally manages to cause a bit of disruption and distraction before it goes down. If you're thinking of buying any 40k in the near future, and you happen to live in the UK, I do have an affiliate link for Element Games in the description below. If you click that link before buying anything, then a small portion of the profits go to Auspex Tactics without costing you any more. I fully recommend them, they're a decent retailer, and I've never personally had any trouble with my orders of model soldiers from those guys. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys in the next episode.